Hi everyone, it's Rosie. Imagine writing a character and then having him suddenly show up in the real world. That is exactly what happens in today's story. We follow Toren as he leaves the pages of a book to meet his aspiring author. You are definitely going to root for this couple. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe for more stories and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's jump right in. Denna stared at the blinking cursor on her laptop screen as if it were challenging her to a duel. It was 11 o'clock on a Friday night. At 26, she was a girl who preferred the company of books over people. Her mind swirled with stories of forbidden love, but the reviews of her novel weren't good. Boring, one comment read. Needs a better villain, said another. The protagonist is too perfect. Where's the conflict? She bit her lip, thinking. She had to do something. The romance needed an antagonist who truly challenged the protagonist. Something dark, powerful, unexpected. Her fingers flew over the keyboard. She created a new character, Toren, the werewolf king, a ruthless alpha with defined muscles, long hair, and golden eyes that glowed like a predator's. He gave orders and everyone obeyed. He had the power to transform into a giant black wolf. Toren would be the reason the protagonist couldn't stay with Elliot. Yes, perfect. She saved the changes and looked at the clock. She was going to be late for work. Elliot was her boss. He was the best-selling author who'd made Denna's heart race since the first day she laid eyes on him. For an aspiring writer, this was the dream job. She organized his schedule, read his drafts, and occasionally daydreamed that he was writing love stories about them. Unfortunately, reality was far less romantic. Elliot treated her with professional kindness, and she was just Denna, the efficient girl. To make matters worse, that morning in the office, Elliot had called her in to discuss sales figures, and mid-meeting announced he was engaged. So she said yes, he concluded, flashing a smile that wasn't for Denna. The wedding will be at the end of the year. Can you note that in the calendar? I need to block those weeks. Denna wrote it down with trembling fingers. The words Elliot's engagement seemed to burn the paper. She forced a congratulatory smile, though inside she felt like she'd been hit by a truck. I'm happy for you, she lied. She's a lucky woman. Elliot laughed and dismissed her. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Back home, Denna threw herself onto the sofa and opened her laptop. The only escape was the story she'd been writing. There, she could control everything. She began to type. 2 hours later, the screen displayed a thrilling chapter. The protagonist, a young human woman, was captured by Toren in his dark castle. The words flowed, and she barely noticed the day turning into night. Suddenly, the computer flickered. The desk lamp blinked. Denna stopped typing, looking around. The apartment was silent, except for the hum of the air conditioner. She sighed. Maybe she was just tired. She turned back to the screen and read the last lines aloud. Toren grabbed her by the wrist, his golden eyes glowing with inner fire. You are mine now, he whispered, dragging her close to his muscular body, and no one, not even that pathetic hero Elliot, will be able to take you from me. Denna smiled. Toren was exactly the kind of villain that made readers swoon. She imagined that scene unfolding, Toren's muscles tensed, his warm breath. She felt a shiver run down her spine. I wish you were real, she murmured without really thinking. Finally, tired of staring at the screen, she put on a coat and went out for a night walk. The night was clear. Without realizing it, she walked to a nearby park where a famous old fountain stood. Local legend said the fountain granted wishes. Denna noticed a couple near the water. They were holding hands, whispering promises to stay together forever. The scene made her feel the weight of her own loneliness, suddenly remembering Elliot's engagement. She approached the edge of the fountain. The dark water reflected the moon. She held a coin tightly. I wish for an unforgettable love, she thought. At the exact moment the thought formed, the coin flipped through the air, hit the surface of the water, and sank. Denna watched the ripples spread. She waited. Nothing happened. The park remained silent. The wind lightly rustled the trees. She turned to leave, feeling foolish for believing in urban legends, but a loud sound of something large breaking the water made her stop. Denna spun on her heels. It was something big, a dark mass submerged, moving slowly at the bottom of the shallow fountain. It looked like heavy fabric, leather, and fur. Denna leaned in further, straining her eyes. The human shape became undeniable. A body. Someone was drowning there. Panic replaced melancholy. She dropped her bag on the stone floor and jumped over the low wall. The icy water soaked her sneakers and the hem of her pants instantly. The bottom was slippery, covered in slime. She moved toward the center where the figure lay motionless. Her hands grabbed a thick arm, hard as stone. The weight was absurd. She pulled with all the strength she had, her feet slipping on the fountain floor. "Hey!" she shouted, her voice coming out hoarse. "Wake up!" With a violent effort, she managed to lift the man's torso out of the water. His head slumped back. Long, soaked black hair covered part of his face, but Dennis saw his profile, a tense jaw, a thin scar cutting through his left eyebrow. He wore strange, heavy clothes, layers of dark leather and furs that absorbed the water and tripled his weight. Denna dragged him to the edge and sat on the grass, his head resting in her lap. The man didn't move. Denna touched his neck, searching for a pulse. His skin burned with an intense, vital heat that radiated even through the cold water. "Please don't die," she whispered, pressing his chest. The next second, a large hand closed around her wrist. The grip was strong enough to crush bones. She screamed, trying to pull her arm away, but he pulled her down. The man opened his eyes. They were golden, a focused and lethal gold without a trace of confusion or sleep. He sat up in a single fluid motion, ignoring the weight of his wet clothes. In an instant, Denna was on her back on the grass and he was over her, his forearm pressed against her collarbone, pinning her down. "Who sent you?" His voice was a low growl, vibrating in his chest against hers. Denna stared at the face above hers. Water dripped from his hair onto her cheeks. He was terrifying, and he was identical. The scar, the eyes, the brutal bone structure. It was Toren, the villain she had finished describing minutes ago. "Let me go!" Denna tried to push him, but it was like pushing a concrete wall. He narrowed his eyes, analyzing her face. He saw only a threat to be neutralized. His hand went to his belt, fumbling for something that wasn't there, a sword. He frowned upon finding only emptiness. "Where is my blade?" he demanded, bringing his face close to hers. "What kind of sorcery have you done? Where are my guards?" Denna stopped struggling, paralyzed by shock. This couldn't be real. "I saved you," Denna stammered. "You were drowning." "Saved me." Toren let out a short, dry laugh, but then he finally looked around, realizing where he was. His eyes swept the park, the manicured trees, and finally landed on the tall buildings in the distance, illuminated by city lights. His expression changed. Aggressiveness gave way to absolute tension. He stood up, getting off her, but stayed on guard. He spun around, watching the cars passing on the distant avenue, the electric streetlights, the orange sky from light pollution. "This is not the North," he said, more to himself than to her. His posture was that of a cornered animal in unknown territory. "Where am I?" Dennis stood up, rubbing her wrist where his fingers had left red marks. She should run. She should grab her bag and run until her lungs burned, but she couldn't. "New York," she replied, her voice trembling. Toren turned to her. The intensity of his golden gaze made her take a step back. He stepped toward her with a natural, arrogant authority. "New York." He repeated the word as if it were poison. "What kingdom is this? Who is the alpha of these lands?" Denna opened her mouth, but nothing came out. He was real. The temperament, the arrogance. She had wished for an unforgettable love, and the universe, with its distorted sense of humor, had delivered the monster of her own creation. Toren looked her up and down, judging her. "You," he pointed an accusing finger, "strange woman in peasant clothes, take me to your leader." Denna looked at the wet man, dressed like a barbarian, demanding an audience with a non-existent leader in the middle of the night. Fear began to give way to hysterical incredulity. "Look, I don't know which asylum you escaped from, but I saved your life. A thank you would be the minimum before you start giving orders." Toren blinked. Her audacity seemed to have caught him by surprise. He tilted his head, his golden eyes fixed on hers with dangerous curiosity. "Thank you."
He tested the word, finding it ridiculous. Foolish mortal, I am Toren, the Alpha King. I do not think, I conquer. The man before her emitted a physical pressure that made the air around them thick. Denna took a step back and turned to grab the bag she had dropped to flee this madness, but Torin moved. 1 second he was 10 feet away, the next he was blocking her path, tall as a tower. Denna felt her pulse hammering in her throat. She looked around, searching for help, but the park was deserted in that area. "You're scaring me," she said, deciding that honesty was her only defense. "Get out of my way." Torin ignored her. He raised his right hand. Between his long, calloused fingers, something shone under the light of the street lamps. The coin she had thrown into the fountain.
"That's mine," Denna said, instinct speaking louder than fear. She reached out to grab it. Torin closed his fist before she could touch the metal. "You threw this into the water as an offering," he declared, tucking the coin into an inner pocket of his leather vest. "Now it belongs to the king. Consider it payment for me not tearing out your tongue for your insolence. You're crazy, completely crazy." He looked at her with a disdain that hurt more than it should. "Go, you have no use to me." He turned and began walking toward the park exec, his steps heavy and silent. Denna stood still, watching his broad back move away. Anger replaced fear for a brief moment. Was that really the character she had created? The man of her literary dreams was an arrogant brute who stole coins from fountains? She grabbed her bag and ran in the opposite direction, toward the safety of the busy streets and eventually her apartment. Torin walked through the jungle of stone and glass. The noise was deafening. Metal beasts roared on the roads, their bright eyes blinding his night vision. He kept his hand near where his sword should be, muscles tense, ready for attack. Nothing made sense. The buildings scratched the sky, covered in artificial lights that didn't burn or release smoke. People passed him, looking away or pointing small, luminous rectangles in his direction. He stopped in front of a closed newsstand. There was a date printed on a stack of papers behind the glass. That year was impossible. The numbers didn't match the calendar of the Northern Kingdom. He leaned his forehead against the cold glass. The magic that brought him here was cruel. He was alone, no army, no throne, just the cold coin against his chest and the image of that strange girl in his mind. He needed a refuge, a place to plan. His tracker instincts took over. He didn't know the city, but he knew how to hunt, and as much as he rejected the idea, amidst the chaos of chemical odors and noise, there was only one trail to follow. Denna locked the apartment door and turned the key twice. She leaned her back against the wood, breathing deeply. The silence of her home had never felt so welcome. "It was a hallucination," she said to the porcelain cat on the shelf. "I need to sleep. This is exhaustion. I'm working too hard." Too tired to do anything else, she threw herself onto the bed and passed out. The morning light streamed through the cracks in the blinds, stinging Denna's eyes. She stretched, feeling her body sore from the effort of pulling that man out of the water. She rolled to the side, seeking the comfort of the pillow. Her hand found something warm, solid, and breathing. Denna opened her eyes. The scream died in her throat, turning into a gasp. Torin was lying in her bed. He occupied almost all the space, arms crossed over his chest, leather boots dirty with mud resting on the pristine white duvet. He slept with the stillness of a predator, motionless yet ready to wake and kill. Denna jumped out of bed, hitting the floor with a dull thud. She backed away, crawling across the carpet until her back hit the wall. "What are you doing here?" she screamed, grabbing a lamp from the nightstand as a weapon. Torin opened one eye. The gold shone in the dimness of the room. He didn't seem surprised nor scared by the threat of the lamp. He sat up slowly, stretching. His shoulder joints popped. "Your security is pathetic," he commented, his voice hoarse with sleep. "A simple lock. I could have blown the door down with a breath, but I decided to be courteous and climbed the outside wall. The window was unlocked." "Get out!" Denna brandished the lamp. "Get out now or I'm calling the police." Torin looked at her, then at the lamp, and let out a low laugh. He got out of bed. The room suddenly felt tiny. "Police? Those little men in blue uniforms?" He laughed and walked toward her. Denna tried to merge into the wall. He stopped a step away and took the lamp from her hand with the ease of someone taking a toy from a child, placing the object back on the table.
You brought me here. You are the only person I know in this world, which means you need to take responsibility for your actions, little human. Now I need sustenance and clothing that doesn't draw so much attention. The people of this kingdom stare too much. Denna stood still for a moment, listening to his footsteps in the hallway toward the kitchen. She looked at the messy bed, the mud marks on the duvet, and the open window. Her fiction had invaded her reality, and the villain had no intention of leaving. Denna's kitchen looked like a dollhouse with Toren inside it. He occupied the space aggressively, opening cabinets with excessive force and staring at the refrigerator as if it held state secrets. Denna stood in the doorway. This is private property, and that toaster was expensive, so stop shaking it. Toren dropped the appliance on the counter. He turned, holding a loaf of sliced bread. Your pantry is a disgrace, human. Where is the meat? Where is the wine? I have a name. It's Denna, and this isn't a medieval banquet. She marched up to him, snatched the bread from his hand, and grabbed eggs from the fridge. Sit down. I'll make something before you destroy my apartment.
To her surprise, he obeyed. He pulled out the wooden chair, which creaked dangerously under his weight, and sat down. His gaze burned into Denna's back, analyzing every movement, every tremor in her hands as she cracked eggs into the pan. She placed the plate in front of him, scrambled eggs and toast. Toren stared at the food suspiciously, sniffed it briefly, and then ate the first forkful. Afterward, he ate everything in seconds, voraciously, cleaning the plate with the bread. Not bad, he decreed, pushing the empty plate away. Now, I need to clean myself. The water from that stagnant fountain is sticking to my skin. Prepare the bath. Denna let out an incredulous laugh. Do you think I'm your servant? The bathroom is the second door on the left. There's a shower. Turn the knob to the right for hot water. Figure it out. Toren raised an eyebrow, the scar on his face moving with the expression. He stood up, walked over to her, and stopped so close that Denna had to tilt her head back to face him. The heat from his body was suffocating. In this world, I do not know your machines, he said, his voice low. You must show me how they work. Unless you prefer, I destroy everything trying to find out. Denna swallowed hard. The threat didn't seem empty. She guided him to the tiny bathroom. The space was too tight for the two of them. Denna stepped into the shower stall, turned the knob, and adjusted the temperature, soaking her pajama sleeve in the process. There, she said without looking at him, trying to exit the stall quickly. Toren blocked the exit. He began unbuttoning his heavy, soaked leather vest right there. The sound of wet leather and metal buckles echoed on the tiles. What are you doing? Denna covered her eyes with her hands and turned her body to the wall. Taking off these wet rags, or do you expect me to go in dressed? Wait until I leave. She pushed his arm, which felt like granite, and managed to squeeze out of the bathroom, slamming the door behind her. Her heart was racing against her ribs. She ran to the bedroom. She needed clothes for him. She couldn't let him walk around the apartment in a towel. She opened the bottom drawer of the dresser. In the back, there were some pieces that belonged to her brother. Baggy sweatpants, old band t-shirts, clothes she kept because she didn't have the heart to donate them. She grabbed a gray set and went back to the bathroom door. I'm leaving clothes out here, she shouted. But before she could step away, the door opened. Steam billowed out in waves, and Toren appeared, with a towel far too small wrapped around his waist. His broad chest was covered in water droplets. Scars crossed his defined abdomen and arms. His wet black hair was slicked back, revealing the harsh features of his face. Denna threw the clothes at his face before she could blush. Put these on. Toren caught the pieces, analyzing the soft fabric. The pants were short at the ankles, and the shirt stretched across his shoulders, but they fit. He stepped out of the bathroom and walked through the living room, now looking like a lazy boyfriend on a Sunday morning. He stopped in front of the living room shelf. There stood a small shrine, 2 photos in silver frames, an older man with a gentle smile and a young man in a baseball cap. Next to them, a vase with artificial flowers. Toren picked up the frame of the young man. Who are these? He asked, without looking at Denna. My father and my brother, Denna replied, her voice fading a bit. She approached to take the photo from his hand, but he didn't let go. Where are they? They're gone. Denna pulled the frame harder. This time Toren allowed her to take it. She placed the photo back, aligning it perfectly with the edge of the shelf. They died 3 years ago. Toren looked at the photos, then at Denna. His expression hardened. Death is everyone's destiny, he said emotionlessly. How did they die? In combat? Denna felt a pang of irritation. No, a car accident. A drunk driver ran a red light. There was no honor, no combat.
Torin frowned, appearing disappointed by the banality of the tragedy. A waste. Men should die by the sword, not by honorless contraptions. You're heartless, Denna retorted, turning her back on him. Listen, Torin, you've eaten, showered, and you have clothes. Now you need to leave. I have to work. I have a life. I don't know how you ended up here, but I can't take care of you. Torin walked to the sofa and sat down, spreading his arms across the backrest, dominating the room. I have nowhere to go, he declared calmly. My powers are dormant. Until I recover my strength, this will be my base camp. What? No way, Denna gestured frantically. You can't stay here. My mother comes here sometimes. The building manager is nosy, and I don't want a barbarian on my sofa. Barbarian? Torin smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. It was a warning. I am a king, and you owe me your life for summoning me to this miserable place. I didn't summon you. It was an accident. Irrelevant. He crossed his legs. I stay, and you will help me understand this world and find a way back. Before Denna could reply, there was a knock on the front door, rhythmic knocks and familiar. Denna? It's me, Mom. I brought that lasagna you like. Denna froze. Her eyes widened in panic. She looked at the door, then at Torin, who remained seated on the sofa. If she sees you here, Denna whispered desperately. Torin raised an eyebrow, defiantly. Are you going to introduce your new guest? Denna cursed under her breath. She ran to him, grabbed him by the arm, and pushed his back with both hands. Bedroom, now. If you make a sound, I swear I'll figure out how to send you back to your land, but in little pieces. Torin laughed quietly, finding the threat adorable, but he stood up and walked lazily to the bedroom, closing the door behind him just as Denna's mother's key turned in the front lock. The door opened, and her mother, Susan, entered. She held a tray covered in aluminum foil, balancing her bag on her shoulder. The doorman said he heard noises up here. Are you redecorating? Denna remained planted in front of the hallway leading to the bedroom, arms outstretched like a panicked goalie. No. The answer came out too fast. Denna cleared her throat, lowering her tone. I was just exercising, moving the sofa to have space. Yoga. Susan narrowed her eyes, examining her daughter. Yoga? I see. With combat boots? She pointed to the floor near the entrance. The mud marks left by Torin formed a visible trail from the hall to the kitchen. Denna looked at the footprints. Her brain worked at maximum speed. That was me. I went for a walk in the park early this morning. It was raining. Susan sighed, shaking her head. She walked to the kitchen. Denna held her breath. The dirty egg plate was still there, along with the greasy pan. You never eat eggs in the morning. You say the smell stays in your hair. Susan turned around, crossing her arms. Denna, are you hiding a boyfriend? A crash came from the bedroom, the sound of something heavy hitting the floor, followed by a low, guttural grunt that definitely wasn't human, or at least not civilized. Denna felt the blood drain from her face. It's the television. I left it on. Action movie, very loud. Susan took a step toward the hallway.
Mom, no! Denna ran and physically blocked the passage. Look, I have a migraine, a bad migraine. I need to be in the dark and absolute silence. But lasagna is great, thank you so much. She spun her mother by the shoulders and led her back to the front door. Susan, stunned by the rush, barely had time to protest. But I just got here. Denna, you're pale. Bye, Mom, I love you. Denna opened the door, gently pushed her mother into the building's hallway, and closed the door, turning the key and sliding the bolt. She leaned her ear against the cold wood of the door, hearing her mother's footsteps fade and the sound of the elevator. Is she gone? Torin's voice came from behind her. Denna turned. He was leaning against the bedroom doorframe, wearing her brother's baggy clothes. The gray t-shirt stretched dangerously across his biceps, and he held a 2-kilogram dumbbell as if it were a toothpick. You dropped that on purpose, Denna accused, walking toward him. That's not funny. Denna ran her face over her head. Look, I have to go to work. You're gonna stay here, quiet, without opening the door for anyone, without breaking anything. Torin pushed off the doorframe and walked toward her. The height difference forced Denna to tilt her chin up. I don't take orders, I make deals. He looked at his own reflection in the hallway mirror and frowned, touching his long, shaggy hair. In this world, men wear short hair. I saw it in the images on that black rectangle. The television? Yes, he turned his gaze back at her. If I am to remain incognito until I recover my powers, I need to blend in. Cut my hair. Denna blinked. What? Now? I have to be in the office in 30 minutes.
Then be quick. Denna huffed in irritation but marched to the bathroom and returned with scissors, a comb, and a towel. She pulled a kitchen chair to the center of the room. Sit. Toren sat. Denna draped the towel over his broad shoulders. She began to comb the thick black strands. They were tangled. She pulled hard without much delicacy. Toren didn't complain, nor did he move a muscle. The metallic sound of the scissors filled the silence of the room. Locks of black hair fell onto the wooden floor. Denna worked fast, focused. His skin was warm. His breathing was rhythmic, slow, contrasting with her anxiety. She cut the sides, leaving the top a bit longer, a modern style she'd seen in magazines. When she finished, she shook the towel. Toren stood up and went to the mirror. He ran his hand over his shaved nape. The cut accentuated his square jaw and predatory eyes. He looked less like a tyrant and more like a magazine cover model. "Not bad," he said, turning his face to the side. "Now the second part of the deal." "There's more?" Denna was putting the scissors in her bag, ready to leave. "I want one of those communicators, the rectangle of light the humans of this age carry. I saw them using them last night while tracking your scent here." "You want a cell phone?" Denna laughed nervously. "Toren, I don't have the money to buy a cell phone for you, and you wouldn't know how to use it. I learn quickly. And as for the gold," he reached into his sweatpants pocket and pulled out a ring. It was heavy, solid gold, with a deep red stone encrusted. He tossed the ring to her. Denna caught it in midair, the weight of the object surprising her. "Sell this, buy the communicator, and bring food, real meat." Denna looked at the ring. It looked like a museum piece. If it were real, it was certainly worth a lot of money. I'll see what I can do." She tucked the ring away. "Stay here. Don't go out, please." Toren sat on the sofa, turning on the TV with the remote as if he'd been doing it for years. Denna left the apartment, slamming the door, her mind spinning. She had a werewolf king on her sofa, a perfect villain, and the irony? She had created him herself. The publishing house office was in chaos. Phones were ringing, assistants were running with papers. Denna arrived at her desk, breathless. "You're late, Denna," a sharp female voice rang out. It was Tessa, the current marketing manager. She was everything Denna wasn't, tall, confident, and impeccably dressed. "Sorry, Tessa, I had a leak in my apartment. Elliot is in the meeting room. The numbers for the new novel are terrible. He's in a bad mood." Tessa dropped a stack of folders on Denna's desk. "She wants coffee, black, no sugar, and she wants you to organize the files for the new writer candidates." Denna nodded, taking the folders. She looked at the closed frosted glass door where Elliot was. She could see his silhouette pacing back and forth. She prepared the coffee in the break room and took a deep breath before entering. The meeting room was cold. Elliot was at the head of the table, rubbing his temples. Two art directors looked like they wanted to disappear into their chairs. "The line work lacks emotion," Elliot said, his voice tired. "The villain looks like a Saturday morning cartoon. Where is the danger? Where is the real threat?" Denna placed the cup in front of him. "Thank you, Denna." He took a sip. "Have you read the draft of Chapter 4? What did you think of the antagonist?" Denna froze. The antagonist of Elliot's book was a corrupt banker. Boring. "It's, well constructed," she lied, the image of Toren coming to mind. "But maybe it lacks physical presence, someone who doesn't need to speak to intimidate." Elliot stopped with the cup halfway to his mouth. He looked at her with genuine interest for the first time that day. "Physical presence," he murmured. Denna's phone vibrated in her pocket. A notification. She looked discreetly. It was a message from an unknown number, but the profile picture was a blurry selfie of Toren, with a message typed in all caps. "Where is my meat?" Denna swallowed hard. Had he figured out how to send messages? Impossible. He probably found her old tablet, but how had he learned so quickly? Before she could think further, another notification appeared. A new photo. Toren appeared next to the building manager, who was smiling and giving a peace sign, though his expression looked visibly frightened next to the Alpha King. "Everything okay, Denna?" Elliot asked. "Yes, everything's great." She hid the phone. "Just plumbing problems." Denna took advantage of her lunch break to run downtown. The ring Toren had given her weighed in her pocket like an anchor. She entered an old jewelry store, far from the modern windows of Fifth Avenue, where an old man with thick glasses examined the piece. The man adjusted the magnifying loupe in his right eye, turning the ring under the lamplight. He stopped. He cleaned the lens and looked again. "Where did you get this, young lady?" His voice trembled slightly. "Family heirloom," Denna lied, keeping her face neutral. The jeweler hesitated, but greed won over curiosity. 20 minutes later, Denna left the store with a brown envelope stuffed with bills. The amount was enough to pay 6 months' rent with plenty left over. Her next stop was an electronics store. She bought the sturdiest smartphone she could find. Then she stopped at a butcher's shop and bought 3 kilos of sirloin. When she reached the apartment, she found Toren exactly where she had left him, on the sofa, but the room was different. He had dragged the armchair to the opposite corner, creating an observation point that covered both the door and the window. "You took your time," he said, without taking his eyes from the TV, which was showing a documentary about wolves in Alaska. Denna threw the new phone on his lap and went to the kitchen. "Press the side button to turn it on. The green icon makes calls. My number is already saved. And here is your tribute." The sound of the packaging opening made Toren turn off the TV. He appeared in the kitchen in absolute silence. He took a raw steak from the board. Denna opened her mouth to offer seasoning or fire, but he ate the raw meat in 2 large bites. Denna looked away, her stomach turning. "You're an animal." "I am a king," he corrected, wiping the corner of his mouth with his thumb. "Fire takes the strength from the blood." "Right. Look, I need to get back to the office." She pointed to the phone. "Don't go out. If you need anything, press the green button. I'll be back tonight." Toren analyzed the small black device in his hand, turning it with dexterity as Denna walked out the door.
The afternoon at the office dragged on. Elliot was locked in his room, rewriting the villain's chapter. Denna organized files, answered emails, and tried not to think too much about the fact that there was a wolf man in her apartment. At 5 in the afternoon, her phone rang. It was an internal extension from the publishing house. "Denna, this is the new talent department." The voice on the other end was excited. "We analyzed the manuscript you submitted last month. The premise is fantastic. We want to schedule a meeting to discuss a publishing contract." Denna almost dropped the phone. Her heart raced. Her, a published author, not just the assistant. "Really?" She stood up, drawing a disapproving look from Tessa across the room. "Yes, of course. Tomorrow? Perfect." She hung up feeling a wave of euphoria. She needed to celebrate, maybe buy some wine on the way home. Even the tyrant's presence in her apartment seemed like a minor problem in light of that news. The sun was setting. She decided to take a shortcut through a less busy side street to get to the market faster. The street was empty except for 2 figures leaning against a dumpster. Denna picked up her pace, clutching her bag tightly against her body. Euphoria vanished, replaced by the cold alert of urban reality. "Hey, princess," one of the men called out. He pushed off the wall, blocking the sidewalk. Denna tried to turn back, but the second man was already behind her. "Hand over the bag and the phone." Denna backed up until her back hit the cold brick wall of an old building. "Take it." She held out the bag. The money from the ring sale was at home, but her documents and work phone were in there. The first man grabbed the bag strap and pulled violently. Denna stumbled. The man laughed and pushed her. She fell onto some cardboard boxes piled near a service door. "Let's see what else she has," the second man said, approaching. He flicked a lighter to see better in the dark alley, the flame illuminating his yellowed teeth. Denna kicked one of the boxes to push him away. The box filled with dry trash and old papers tipped over onto the man's leg. The lighter fell. The fire caught instantly. The dry cardboard acted like gunpowder. The flames rose, licking the wall and surrounding Denna in a semicircle of intense heat. Trauma hit Denna before the heat, the memory of the car in flames, her father and brother trapped in the wreckage. The hot air entered her lungs, suffocating her. She huddled on the ground, covering her head with her arms, unable to move, unable to breathe. The thieves backed away, startled by the sudden fire, but Denna no longer saw them. "Help," she whispered, her voice hoarse from smoke and panic. There was no sound of sirens, no shouts of heroes. There was only a thud, the sound of something heavy landing on the asphalt from above, from one of the rooftops. A shadow crossed the flames.
Toren broke through the wall of fire, his gray sweatpants now singed. He didn't cough, he didn't hesitate. He reached Denna and lifted her off the ground with one arm, as if she weighed nothing. The thieves, who were still at the alley entrance deciding whether to flee, stopped upon seeing the figure emerge from the middle of the fire. Toren put Denna on the ground behind him, shielding her with his own body. His eyes reflected the flames, glowing with a murderous gold. "You," Toren growled. His voice was lower and more terrifying than the crackling of the fire. He lunged forward. A punch hit the first man in the chest, launching him against the dumpster. The second tried to run, but Toren reached him in 2 long strides, grabbing him by the collar and throwing him against the brick wall. The man slid to the ground, unconscious. In the distance, the sound of police sirens began to echo. Toren turned to Denna. The fire was still growing behind them, but he seemed immune to the heat. He grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. Denna was shaking, her eyes glazed, lost in panic. "Breathe," he ordered. "Look at me. Breathe." Denna blinked, focusing on his face. The scar, the tense jaw, the fierce intensity. Toren's reality was stronger than the memory of the fire. The blue and red lights of the police car reflected off the alley walls. "We need to go," Toren said. He slid his arm under her knees and lifted her into his lap again. Before the patrol car entered the street, Toren ran to the fence of a parking lot, jumped 10 feet high with impossible ease, and disappeared into the city shadows, carrying Denna away from danger. Denna was still shaking when Toren set her down in the hallway of the 4th floor of her building. They had covered the miles between downtown and the apartment in an impossible time, moving through the shadows like ghosts. "You are safe now," he said, letting her go. His breathing wasn't even altered. Denna leaned against the wall. The smell of smoke was still caught in her hair. "How," she began, her voice failing, "how did you know where I was? I didn't even have my phone in my hand." Toren crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. "I heard you." "You heard? Miles away?" It wasn't a physical sound. He touched his chest, over where he kept the coin. It was a call, like a tug. I was in the apartment, watching that light box, and suddenly, I was there, in the middle of the fire. Denna's eyes widened. "It seems like a curse that binds me to you," he grumbled, though there was a hint of pride in his voice. Denna ignored the insult. The reality of having a supernatural bodyguard was disturbing and strangely comforting. But then reality hit her. "My mother almost caught you this morning. I can't keep hiding a 6'5" man in my sofa. What if she decides to stay for the weekend?" Toren looked at the door of the neighboring apartment, 4B. There was a "for rent" sign hanging on the doorknob for months. "That territory is unoccupied," he pointed. "4B? That's Mr. Rossi's. He's annoying and charges a lot." Toren reached into his pocket and pulled out the stack of bills Denna had given him earlier from the ring sale. He held the money to her. "Buy the territory." "Rent, Toren, rent." Denna took the money. It was more than enough for the deposit and a few months' rent. "All right, I'll go talk to Mr. Rossi right now." An hour later, Toren was standing in the empty living room of apartment 4B. It was identical to Denna's. "The furnishing is non-existent," he observed, his voice echoing. "We'll get basic things tomorrow," Denna said, exhausted. "I have an air mattress in my closet. It'll do for tonight." Toren turned to her. "I have 3 conditions for remaining in this exile." He held up 3 fingers. "First, my sleep is sacred. Do not disturb me while I rest. Second, I demand 3 daily meals with meat. Third, I want unrestricted access to the World Knowledge Network." "The internet? You learned fast," Denna smiled faintly. "Deal. But I have conditions too. No swords, no killing neighbors, and no showing up at my work unless I'm actually on fire." Toren nodded solemnly. "Agreement sealed." He walked to the window, looking out at the city. "What happened today?" Toren asked, without turning. Denna hugged her own body. The night chill seemed to penetrate her bones. I have a history with fire." Toren turned slowly. "Your father and your brother?" he deduced. Denna nodded, her eyes welling. "I was in the back seat. The car flipped. The tank exploded. I was trapped, watching the flames swallow everything." She swallowed her tears. "Since then, whenever I see fire, I go back to that moment." Silence stretched between them. Denna waited for a comment about weakness from her villain. Toren pushed off the window and walked to her. He stopped a step away, his commanding presence filling the space. He looked down at her, his gold eyes sweeping her face with an intensity that made her hold her breath. "Weakness is human," he said, his voice surprisingly soft. "But surviving and continuing to walk, that is strength." He touched her chin with the tip of his finger, tilting her face up so she would look at him. "Now I know your fear, and as your involuntary protector, it is my duty to ensure that fire never touches you again." He withdrew his hand abruptly and resumed his arrogant posture. Now, go. Bring the air mattress. The floor is too hard for a king." Denna left the apartment, her heart beating in a confused rhythm. She touched her chin where he had touched her. The villain of her story was beginning to seem more human than any margin of safety.
The next morning began with Denna knocking on the door of apartment 4B. She was holding a bag of breakfast and the new smartphone, now configured and with internet access. Before she could knock a third time, the door swung open abruptly. Toren was there, blocking the entrance. He wore the same gray sweatpants, but was shirtless. His broad, defined chest displayed pale scars against his tanned skin, marks of ancient battles that Denna knew by heart because she had described them herself. "You took your time," he complained, pulling her inside and closing the door. The empty apartment echoed their voices. "Good morning to you too." Denna handed him the bag. "Here is the rectangle of knowledge, and more food. I have to go to work." Toren took the phone, ignoring the food. His large fingers slid across the screen with surprising delicacy. "I saw the neighbors," he commented without looking at her. "They emerge from their burrows at the same time. They all march toward metal boxes. It is a society of ants." "It's called a routine, Toren. Try not to scare anyone while I'm out. And please, don't leave the building." He looked up, golden and intense. "I go where I please, but for now, this device has enough information to keep me occupied. Go, woman, bring more gold." The office was in an uproar with the usual tension caused by Elliot. Denna found Tessa in the break room. The marketing manager was leaning against the counter, staring into her coffee cup as if she could predict the future in the grounds. "He's impossible today," Tessa warned without preamble. "The engagement seems to have made him crankier. He fired the intern because the font size was 11, not 12. Denna felt a pit in her stomach. "I have to deliver the week's schedule." "Elliot doesn't kill," Tessa corrected, adjusting her glasses. "He obliterates with silence. If he doesn't scream at you, worry. Silence is the sign that you are irrelevant." Dennis swallowed hard and went to Elliot's room. He was standing, looking out the window, his back to the door. "I brought your schedule," she said, placing the tablet on the table. Elliot turned. He looked exhausted. Deep, dark circles contrasted with his impeccable suit. "Thank you, Denna." He didn't even look at the tablet. "You can go to lunch. I need to be alone." Denna left feeling a pang of disappointment. He hadn't even asked how she was. Decided to cheer herself up and secretly celebrate her future as an author, Denna went to a nearby Korean restaurant. She ordered a full meal, sitting alone at a corner table. While she ate, she watched the next table. A young couple was laughing. The young man, with a soft and affectionate gesture, reached out and wiped a bit of sauce from the corner of her girlfriend's mouth. She smiled, holding his hand. The gesture was simple, intimate. Denna felt her chest tighten. She looked at her own full plate. "I wish I had someone who would do that for me," she thought, the loneliness weighing more than the food. The air in the room changed. The atmospheric pressure dropped drastically, making her ears pop. Toren appeared in the restaurant doorway. Denna choked, coughing violently. Customers around looked on, startled by the large man who seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. Toren looked furious. He gripped the new cell phone in one hand, his knuckles white. He walked to the table where she was and sat in the empty chair across from her. "What is it now?" he hissed, leaning over the table. "Where is the danger? Where are the assassins? I was in the middle of a video about the history of world wars." Denna looked at him, eyes wide, her face burning with shame. I didn't call you." "You called. I felt the tug." Toren looked around, searching for threats. He saw nothing but people eating and hurried waiters. He turned his gaze back at Denna. "Why did you bring me here?" Denna lowered her head, mortified. I just wished—" She couldn't say it. Toren narrowed his eyes. He looked around. Then he looked at Denna, at the red sauce at the corner of her mouth. Toren huffed. He stood up, the chair dragging on the floor with a screeching noise, and sat in front of her. He leaned over the table while his hand, calloused and warm, touched Denna's face. His thumb passed over the corner of her mouth, firm and rough, wiping the sauce stain. An immediate shiver ran through her body. Denna stopped breathing. She lowered her hands and looked at him. Toren's olden eyes were fixed on her lips. For a second, his irritation wavered, replaced by something thick and hungry.
"Never summon me for trivialities again," he said, his voice hoarse. And as quickly as he had appeared, he was gone. The air filled the vacuum he left behind.
The rest of the day was a disaster. Denna couldn't concentrate. At night, she took the bus home. It was crowded, noisy. Her feet ached inside her heels. The swaying of the vehicle made her nauseous. She was exhausted, physically and emotionally. She leaned her head against the cold, vibrating bus window. I just wanted a rest, she thought, closing her eyes. Just a safe place to rest my head. The seat next to her sank. Denna opened her eyes. Toren was there. He occupied half of her seat with his broad shoulders. He looked straight ahead, his expression closed, ignoring the curious looks of other passengers wondering where that massive man had come from. "You have to stop this," he said, without looking at her. "I'm getting dizzy with this back and forth." Denna smiled, a weak and tired smile. "Sorry, be quiet." Toren uncrossed his arms and, with a stiff movement, put his arm over her shoulders, pulling her toward him. He pushed her head down until it rested on his hard shoulder. "Sleep. I'll wake you when we arrive." Denna relaxed. His body was warm and solid like a rock. The city smell disappeared, replaced only by his presence. "Thank you, Toren," she whispered, closing her eyes. "Sleep before I change my mind and throw you out the window." But his villainous speech contrasted with his arm around her, keeping her safe until the end of the trip. The bus stopped with a jolt. Denna woke startled, peeling her face away from Toren's hard shoulder. He remained motionless, staring ahead, his jaw locked. They got off in silence. The walk to the building was tense. Denna felt she owed an explanation, but Toren seemed like an impassable wall. When they reached their floor, Toren stopped in front of door 4B, but didn't enter. He turned to her. "Stop calling me," he said, his voice low and harsh. "I already told you I'm not doing it. It was an accident." "It's not about wanting." Toren took a step toward her, invading her personal space. "I feel it every time that pathetic sadness tightens your chest. It's like a hook in my guts, and I hate it." Denna went mute. The intensity in his golden eyes wasn't of servitude, it was of resentment. "I didn't know," she whispered. "Now you know. Control yourself. I didn't cross the universe to be a nanny to a human." He entered 4B and slammed the door. Denna entered her own apartment, feeling tiny. She threw her bag on the sofa and went to the fridge. She grabbed a bottle of cheap wine that had been open for days. She needed to numb the shame, the rejection from Elliot, from the world. She went to the small fire escape, a rusted metal structure overlooking the back alley. She sat on the cold metal floor, drinking wine straight from the bottle, watching the city lights. In the apartment next door, through the thin brick wall, Toren leaned against the dark window. He could hear her heartbeat, an irregular rhythm accelerated by alcohol and anguish. He closed his eyes, cursing the ancient gods. He knew what that meant. She ignited the beast within him, making him more alive, more dangerous. She was his mate. But she was a fragile human from a world without magic, in love with a mediocre writer, and he was an exiled king who needed to go home. Telling her the truth would only complicate everything. If she knew, he would never be able to leave her. The sound of a muffled sob came from the balcony next door. Toren growled, punching the wall. Instinct screamed louder than reason. He opened his window, which led to the same fire escape, and stepped out into the cold night. Denna raised her eyes, red and swollen, when she saw him jump the railing that separated the balconies with the agility of a giant cat. "I told you to control yourself," he said, but there was no anger in his voice, only a tired resignation. He sat down beside her on the cold metal, taking the bottle from her hand. "I'm trying," Denna said, her voice choked, "but it hurts." "Is it about the scribe you mentioned the other day? What was his name again?" Toren asked, taking a sip of the wine and making a face at the sour taste. "It's Elliot," she said. She looked at him. "I wanted to live an unforgettable love, and what did I get? A boss who's going to marry someone else, and a book character who hates me and lives next door." Toren looked at her profile. The moonlight softened the lines of worry on Denna's face. The urge to touch her, to claim her right there in the middle of that precarious metal structure was too strong. He clenched his fists to restrain himself. "You don't know what you ask for," he said sharply.
Unforgettable love isn't flowers and poetry, Denna. It's blood, it's war, it's having someone who is your exposed weakness. A king cannot afford the luxury of loving because love makes him vulnerable. You should be thankful your scribe doesn't look at you. He spared you from being the target on his back. Denna laughed, a bitter sound. You talk as if love were a curse. It is the worst of all. He handed the bottle back. Forget the wish, forget the scribe. You have me now to protect your pathetic life until I find the way back. That will have to suffice. Denna rested her head on his shoulder. This time, Toren didn't complain. He stayed rigid, allowing the contact. You're a terrible consoler, Toren. And you are a terrible drinker. Let's go in. It's going to rain. As if he commanded the weather, a crack of thunder boomed above them. The rain began to pour, pushing them into Denna's apartment. They entered drenched, Denna laughing from the sudden rush. For a moment, the tension had dissipated. I'll get a towel, Denna said, going to the bathroom. When she returned, drying her hair, she stopped abruptly in the hallway. The front door was open. Susan, her mother, was standing in the middle of the room holding a spare key and a grocery bag. She was staring fixedly at Toren. Toren was shirtless, as he had taken it off to dry his face and now displayed his broad torso and scars under the living room light. Silence lasted 5 eternal seconds. "Mom!" Denna shouted, running into the living room. Susan raised her hand, calling for silence without taking her eyes from Toren. "You said you were doing yoga," Susan said, her voice too calm. "I didn't know yoga involved a half-naked gladiator." Toren, to his credit, was not intimidated. He straightened his posture, assuming that royal and arrogant air. "I am not a gladiator," he corrected. "I am—" "The new personal trainer," Denna interrupted, stepping in front of him, "and security, and neighbor. He lives in 4B. His shower broke, he came to ask for help. That's what neighbors do, right?" Susan looked from Denna to Toren, analyzing the situation with a mother's clinical eye. Security and neighbor. And what is the name of this helpful neighbor? Toren, he replied, before Denna could invent something. He held out his large hand to Susan. Toren of the North. Susan shook his hand, appearing impressed with the firm grip. Susan, Denna's mother. She smiled, a smile Denna knew well. The "finally my daughter is off the shelf" smile. "Well, Toren of the North, since you drank our wine, the minimum you can do is stay for dinner." "Mom, you don't have to," Denna tried. "I accept," Toren said immediately. "Your daughter feeds me bread and greens. I need a proper meal." Dinner was surprisingly civilized. Toren dressed in a dry shirt and sat at the table with impeccable posture. He ate voraciously, but with a strange etiquette. Susan was enchanted. "So, Toren, what do you do exactly?" she asked, pouring him more wine. Denna held her breath. "I solve problems," Toren replied enigmatically. "I ensure the borders are secure and that invaders are repelled." "Ah, private security. A dangerous job. Denna needs someone like that. She's very distracted, always has her head in those books." "I've noticed," Toren looked at Denna. "She has a faulty self-preservation instinct. She draws danger like honey draws bears." "Exactly," Susan laughed. "You know, she recently wrote a book about a dangerous man. She posts it online. I follow every chapter. You remind me a bit of the character. What was his name? The villain." Denna choked on her rice. "Mom, no one wants to talk about my book." Toren smiled, a corner smile, teasing. "I would like to hear. Does the villain win in the end?" "He doesn't have an ending yet," Denna murmured, glaring at him. "It depends on how he behaves." Susan looked from one to the other, sensing the electric tension in the air. "Well," she said, standing up, "Toren, you seem like a good man, despite your intimidating appearance. Denna was in need of real friends." "I am not her friend," Toren said, seriously. Denna felt her stomach sink. Here comes the rejection in front of my mother. "I am her protector," Toren corrected, looking Susan in the eye. "While I am here, nothing will hurt her." Susan was speechless for a moment. Denna felt her face heat up. Her heart skipped a beat, and she saw Toren's jaw tense, proving he had felt her physical reaction. "Well," Susan cleared her throat, wiping an emotional tear, "I'm glad to hear that. But now, Toren, if you could help me fix the kitchen shelf Denna promised to fix months ago." "Mom, are you going to exploit the neighbor?" Toren was already on his feet. "Show me the shelf. If it is wood and nail, I can fix it." Denna stayed at the table watching the two go to the kitchen. Toren, the werewolf's king, the scourge of the snows, was fixing her cabinet. The night ended with Susan leaving completely won over. Denna closed the door and leaned against it, exhausted. Toren was in the living room finishing off the leftover shepherd's pie. Your mother is a sensible woman. She understands the importance of feeding the army. You manipulated her, Denna accused, walking toward him. I am her protector? What kind of scene was that? Toren stood up, wiping his mouth. He walked toward her, stopping inches away. The joking was over. The tension returned. I do not lie, Denna. Why? She whispered, looking up. You say you hate me. Toren lowered his head, his face near her neck. He inhaled deeply, without touching her, just feeling the heat of her skin. This is not something I can choose, he said softly, almost choking on his own breath. Before Denna could respond or make any move, Toren pulled away abruptly and walked out the front door, heading for 4B, leaving Denna alone with her heart racing. The next day at the office was a test of endurance. Her boss was impatient, pacing back and forth in his room as dictating emails to Denna, who tried to keep up with the frantic pace by typing on her tablet. The special edition launch needs to be perfect, Elliot was saying, running a hand through his hair. The investors will be at tonight's event. I need to be there to ensure funding for the next trilogy. He stopped and looked at Denna. My fiancée, Sarah, is at a conference in Boston. He hesitated, spinning the ring on his finger, a nervous tic Denna knew well. Denna, I need you to go with me. You know the numbers, you know the project. Sarah hates talking business, but you're my right hand. Denna's heart gave a painful leap. Being the right hand was a professional honor, but a romantic death sentence. Of course, Elliot, she replied professionally. What time? At 8. It's black tie. He returned to his desk, already dismissing her presence with a gesture. Wear something elegant. The press will be there. Denna left the room feeling the weight of those words. Wear something elegant, as if her wardrobe, made up of clearance sale cardigans, were a personal offense to the company's aesthetic. She went to the bathroom and stared into the mirror. Deep circles under her eyes, a wrinkled cotton blouse. She looked exactly like what she was, the girl from the shadows. Suddenly, her phone vibrated. It wasn't an email notification. It was a call. On the screen, it read, The Tyrant. She answered, whispering, Toren, I'm working. You are distressed. Your anxiety is souring my lunch. What happened now? Nothing. My boss summoned me to a gala event tonight. A gala event. There was a pause. Denna could imagine Toren frowning. A court celebration? Something like that. But I have nothing to wear. Elliot asked for something elegant, and the only thing I have is a 5-year-old black dress with an unraveled hem. I'm going to embarrass myself. Embarrass, Toren's tone changed. It became colder, more dangerous. You walk under the protection of the Alpha. If you look like a bigger, it reflects on my honor. A king does not permit his ward to walk in rags. Toren, I don't have the money to buy a gala dress right now. The ring money went toward the rent of your apartment and filling your fridge with meat. Get out of that building now. What? I can't. I'm in front. Denna ran to the hallway window. Down below, on the busy Manhattan sidewalk, Toren was standing. He wore a tight black shirt and dark jeans. He stood out in the crowd not because of his clothes, but because of his posture. People detoured around him like water around a rock. He stood with arms crossed, looking directly at the 10th floor window, as if he could see her through the reflective glass. I'm going down, Denna said, defeated. Denna made an excuse to Tessa about picking up external documents and went down. Toren was waiting impatiently. Let's go, he said, holding her elbow and guiding her down the street. Where to? To acquire your armor, to prepare for battle. He took her to Fifth Avenue. Not to the department stores, but to a high-fashion boutique where the windows had no prices and the mannequins seemed to judge your bank account.
Denna froze at the entrance. Toren, no, not even in 10 years could I afford a sock here. Toren ignored the protest. He pushed open the heavy glass door. An impeccable saleswoman, with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes, approached. She looked at Denna's simple clothes and Toren's rough look with veiled disdain. Can I help you? The tone suggested they were lost. Toren walked over to the woman. His presence filled the store. He took something from his pocket that made the saleswoman turn pale. It wasn't money. It was another ring, this time a dark blue sapphire the size of a quail egg, mounted in raw white gold. I wish to outfit the lady, Torin said, placing the jewel on the glass counter with a soft thud. The best you have, something worthy of a queen of the north. The saleswoman swallowed hard, her eyes fixed on the sapphire. She knew how to recognize a royal jewel. Her attitude changed from "security, please" to absolute servitude in a second. Of course, sir. This way, miss. Denna was dragged to a fitting room that was larger than her bedroom. Dresses began to arrive, silks, velvets, organzas. Torin sat in a velvet armchair in the waiting area, rejecting offers of champagne. He vetoed the dresses with head movements. Too fragile, he said of a pale pink dress. She'll blend into the curtains. Too vulgar, he commented on a short sequined dress. A woman doesn't need to show skin to show power. Finally, the saleswoman brought a piece in deep emerald green. It was made of heavy silk, with a structured V-neck and a side slit. The back was open, crossed by thin straps. Denna put it on. The fabric slid over her skin. She looked at herself in the mirror. The cut highlighted her waist. The color accentuated her brown eyes. She stepped out of the fitting room. Torin stopped looking at his phone. He stood up slowly. The silence in the store was absolute. Torin's golden eyes swept Denna from toe to head. There was no cheap lust. There was a solemn recognition. His pupil dilated, swallowing the golden iris. A wave of heat made Denna's hands sweat. He walked over to her. He stopped behind her, looking at the reflection of the two in the large mirror. Him, dark and dangerous. She, vibrant and real. "Not bad," he said near her ear, making her shiver. "It's too expensive, Torin," Denna said, her voice failing. "I can't accept it." "Consider it an investment." He lightly touched her bare back, where the straps crossed. Her skin burned under his touch. "Tonight you go to war, and I don't let my allies enter the field unprotected." He turned to the saleswoman who was waiting with bated breath. "We'll take this one, and the matching shoes." At 8 o'clock, Dennis stepped out of the taxi in front of the public library and climbed the stone steps. The cold night wind rustled the silk of the green dress. She didn't feel like the Denna who typed spreadsheets. She felt the weight of Torin's gaze, the confidence he had injected in her. Elliot was at the top of the stairs, talking to a group of investors. He looked tired, checking his watch impatiently. When Denna reached the top, Elliot turned. "Denna, where were you?" "Sorry I'm late, Elliot," Denna said, surprised by the firmness of her own voice. The traffic was impossible. Elliot kept staring at her for a moment, his mouth slightly ajar. The other investors around also stopped talking, turning their attention to her. "You look—" Elliot cleared his throat, trying to regain professional composure, but failing. "You look incredible, Denna." Denna smiled, not the shy smile of always, but an enigmatic smile. "Thank you. Shall we talk about funding?" She passed him, entering the hall. For the first time, she wasn't following Elliot. He was the one who had to quicken his pace to catch up with her. Farther away, in apartment 4B, Toren was sitting in the dark, holding a glass of whiskey. He felt her satisfaction through the bond, the pride, the adrenaline, but he also felt Elliot's admiration. The glass in Toren's hand cracked, a fracture appearing in the thick glass. The gala ball flowed with the polished murmur of crystal glasses and superficial conversations. Under the giant chandelier of the public library, Denna moved with a poise she didn't know she possessed. She discussed profit margins with a German investor and debated literary trends with a critic from the Times. Elliot remained by her side, but for the first time, he seemed like the accessory. He watched Denna with a continuous expression of perplexity. "You were brilliant with Mr. Schneider," Elliot commented when they were finally alone near one of the snack tables. He picked up 2 glasses of champagne and offered one to her. "I just read the reports," Denna replied, taking a sip. The drink was cold and dry. "He wanted numbers, not your tormented author charm." Elliot laughed, a genuine and surprised sound. "Tormented author charm? Is that how you see me? That's how your book covers sell you." Elliot took a step forward. His scent was familiar. It was the scent Denna had associated with love for 2 years. The orchestra began to play a slow waltz. "Dance with me?" Elliot asked. Denna hesitated. It was the scene she had dreamed of 1,000 times at her office desk, but as she placed her hand in his, she felt a sharp pang in her chest. It was a tug, an invisible rope stretching across the city, vibrating with irritation. She ignored the sensation and let Elliot lead her to the floor. His hand on her waist was firm but polite. They spun. You know, Denna, Elliot said, looking into her eyes, I spent so much time focused on deadlines that I think I missed what was right in front of me. You look different today. It's the dress, Denna deflected, feeling her stomach turn, not from butterflies but from guilt. It's not the dress. Elliot lowered his voice. His face moved closer. The atmosphere around them seemed to close into an intimate bubble. It's you. You were always loyal. I should have valued that sooner. He was flirting. Elliot, the man she had secretly admired for years, was flirting with her. Denna should have been exultant. It should have been the moment of victory, but all she felt was the silk fabric rubbing against her skin, reminding her of who had bought it. She remembered the hoarse voice in the fitting room, encouraging her. Elliot was safe, Toren was the abyss, and by the ancient gods, the abyss seemed much more interesting. Suddenly, Elliot's cell phone vibrated in his jacket pocket, breaking the moment. He stopped dancing, blinking as if waking from a trance. Sorry, he said, letting go of her waist to chuck the device. The name Sarah flashed on the screen. Elliot's expression changed instantly to one of guilt and fatigue. I have to take this. It's Sarah. She must have arrived at the hotel. The bubble burst. Cold reality flooded the hall. Of course, Denna said, her voice neutral. Go, I'm going to get some air. Elliot nodded, already walking away with the phone to his ear, murmuring apologies and sweet words to his fiancée. Denna stood alone in the middle of the dance floor, feeling ridiculous in her new dress. She walked to the library balcony. The night air was freezing. She rested her hands on the stone balustrade, looking at the traffic below. What a joke, she whispered to herself. The phone in her handbag vibrated. A text message. Tyrant. If he touched you in a disrespectful way, I will burn the library to the ground. Denna looked at the screen and, for the first time that night, truly smiled, a crooked and tired smile. She typed back, Denna. He was a gentleman, and then he went to answer his fiancé. I'm going home. Tyrant. I am waiting. Denna put the phone away. She didn't wait for Elliot to finish the call. She took a taxi and watched the city pass through the window, wishing for the first time not to be in a romantic fairy tale with her boss, but in the brutal company of her villain's lair. Apartment 4B was dimly lit when Denna entered. The door was unlocked, as always. Toren was sitting on the living room floor, his back against the wall, one leg stretched out and the other bent. He was cleaning a kitchen knife with a cloth, but the movement was mechanical. When Denna entered, he raised his eyes. The intensity in them made the hallway air seem thin. You came back early, he observed. Denna took off her high heels, letting out a sigh of relief at feeling the cold floor under her bare feet. The party is over for me. Toren stood up. He walked toward her, stopping at a safe distance, but close enough for her to feel the heat radiating from him. Did he offend you? His eyes swept her face for signs of crying. No, Denna shook her head. He was perfect, said the right things, noticed me. Toren jowled his jaw. Then why do you look like someone who lost a war? Denna looked at him, at the black hair he had cut, at the scar on his brow, at the gray t-shirt stretched across his chest. Because being there with him felt wrong, she confessed, her voice low. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, and confused. He raised his hand, hesitating for a second, before touching her cheek with the back of his fingers. The touch was light, almost reverential. Take off this silk armor, he murmured. Go back to being you. Denna closed her eyes, leaning her face against his hand. Her heart beat against her ribs in a rhythm that said a name that definitely wasn't Elliot. Toren, she began. He pulled away abruptly, as if he'd been shocked. The mask of coldness descended over his face again. Go to sleep. Tomorrow we begin your training. Training? Denna blinked, confused by the sudden change. Yes, he went to the kitchen, fleeing her. Good night, Denna. He left, closing the door behind him. Denna was left alone, the green dress suddenly feeling far too heavy, and the feeling that her story was going completely off script. The cell phone alarm rang at 5:50. She was actually doing this. Opening the bedroom door, she found Toren already in the living room. He was doing one-handed push-ups, his body rising and falling in a hypnotic and mechanical rhythm. He stopped mid-movement, supporting his body weight on 3 fingers, and looked at her. You're late, he said, standing up in a fluid motion. The sun has already risen. The enemy doesn't wait for you to brush your teeth. Good morning to you too, Denna grumbled, pulling the zipper of her hoodie up to her neck. And we don't have enemies. We have neighbors who sleep, so keep it down.
Toren didn't respond. He just opened the door and signaled her to leave. They went to an isolated area of the park, away from the main trails where morning joggers passed with their headphones on. The grass was wet with dew, and the cold air burned Denna's lungs. "Run," Toren ordered. "How far?" "Until I tell you to stop." Denna ran. With every step, she mentally cursed the day she had decided to write about a ruthless alpha king. She ran until her legs burned. When she stopped, resting her hands on her knees and gasping, Toren didn't even seem to have sweated. "Your endurance is non-existent," he evaluated, walking around her like a shark circling prey. "If you have to flee, you'll be caught in seconds." "I'm an author, not a marathoner," managed Denna to say between breaths. "Then learn to fight." He stopped in front of her. "Attack me." Denna laughed, breathless. "What? No." "Attack me, Denna. Imagine I am one of those thieves, or the scribe who broke your heart. Hit me." The mention of Elliot ignited a spark of irritation. Denna straightened her body. She balled her fist as she had seen in movies and threw a punch toward Toren's chest. He didn't move. He just opened his hand and parried her punch. The impact reverberated through Denna's arm, hurting her wrist. He didn't even blink. "Wrong," he said, holding her wrist. "The thumb goes on the outside. If you hit like that, you'll break your finger. And you don't have the strength to hurt me with impact. Use the joints. Use your body weight." He pulled her arm, spun his body, and in a second, Denna was pressed back against a thick tree trunk, with Toren's forearm against her throat. It didn't choke her, but it immobilized her. The proximity was overwhelming. His face was inches from hers. He could see the small scars on his face, his golden iris contracting with focus. The heat of his body surged through the layers of clothing. "The world is cruel, Denna," he whispered, his deep voice vibrating against her skin. "And I won't be here forever. When I leave, who will prevent you from being cornered like this?" Denna's heart failed. The mention of his departure was a bucket of cold water, colder than the morning air.
"Are you leaving?" The question came in a thread of a voice. Toren loosened the pressure on his arm, but didn't pull away. He looked at her mouth, then her eyes. A shadow of pain crossed his face, too fast to be deciphered. "I am a king. My place is not here. I have a kingdom to rule. I have wars to win." He let her go and stepped back, turning his back to her. Again, and this time, tried to actually hit me. Denna looked at his broad back. Anger replaced sadness. He was leaving. Of course he was. He was fiction trying to return to the page. She lunged forward and kicked his leg with all her might. Toren grunted, surprised, but not in pain. He turned around, a predatory and approving smile on his face. Better, much better. The week passed far too quickly. The dynamic between Denna and Elliot in the office had changed. Since the gala, Elliot watched her. He stopped by her desk for no reason, started conversations about books, and praised her clothes, even when she went back to wearing cardigans. But Denna barely noticed. Her mind was on apartment 4B. That Thursday, she arrived home with a bottle of cheap champagne. The contract for her book was finalized. She was going to be published. She knocked on Toren's door. He opened it, holding a history book about the Roman Empire. "They made obvious tactical errors," he commented, letting her in. "Expansion was too fast. Supply lines failed." "Hello to you too, General," Denna said, entering. His apartment now had a few pieces of furniture, a second-hand armchair, a wobbly table, and stacks of books she'd brought from the library. "Forget the Romans. I have news." She held up the bottle. "I signed the contract. The Tyrant Neighbor is going to be published." Toren stopped. He placed the book on the table carefully. "The book is about me?" "It's fiction, Toren, based on facts. And what is my destiny in this work? Do I win? Do I die?" Denna placed the bottle on the table and began trying to pop the cork. The cork was stubborn. "I haven't written the end yet." The cork was stubborn. "But the editors want a romance. They want the protagonist and the villain to end up together." Toren watched her hands struggling with the bottle. He approached, covered her hands with his, and twisted the cork with a simple movement. The pop echoed in the empty room. "And that is impossible," he affirmed, pouring the liquid into 2 coffee mugs since there were no glasses. "A hero and a villain cannot coexist. One always destroys the other." "Maybe," Denna replied, taking the mug. Or maybe they find out they aren't that different. She took a sip, feeling the bubbles and the alcohol. "Can I read it?" Toren asked. Denna choked. "No, it's a draft. It's horrible." "I read your journals when you went out yesterday," he said casually. Denna turned purple. "You what?" "They were on the table. I needed to understand the mind of my host." He didn't seem the least bit sorry.
"You write a lot about the scribe." Elliot smiled and the world stopped. "It's sickening, but the recent parts?"
He took a step toward her. "The recent parts are about a man who comes out of the shadows, about training in the park." Denna backed up until she hit the table. "It's fiction," she repeated, her voice weak. "Don't lie to me, Denna." He rested his hands on the table, trapping her between his arms. "You stopped writing about the scribe. Now you write about me. And in your draft, the protagonist isn't afraid of the monster. She wants to be devoured by him." Toren smiled, a villainous, impeccable, and dangerous smile. Denna's heart was beating so hard she was sure he could feel it. "And if she does," Denna challenged, tilting her chin up, "what would the monster do?" Toren looked at her mouth. The tension was palpable, an electric wire about to snap. He tilted his head, brushing his nose against her neck, inhaling deeply. "The monster would flee," he whispered against her skin, "because he would know he must leave at some point." He pulled away abruptly, taking the mug and draining the rest of the champagne in one gulp. On Friday, Elliot insisted on taking Denna to lunch, to celebrate her book, he said. Denna couldn't refuse without being rude. They went to a French bistro near the office. Elliot was charming and attentive. He talked about how proud he was of her and how he always knew she had talent. "You know, Denna," Elliot said, cutting his steak, "Sarah and I, we're going through a difficult time. She's very focused on her career. Sometimes I feel like we're just business partners, not lovers." Denna chewed slowly. Months ago, this confession would have made her float with hope. Now it just sounded like a needy man looking for validation. "Relationships are hard," Denna replied neutrally. "Yes, but sometimes I look at you and think, you understand me. You read what I write and know exactly what I meant." He reached his hand across the table, covering Denna's hand. At that moment, the bistro door swung open with excessive force. The bell above the door rang violently. Toren entered. He looked like a storm personified. Customers stopped eating. Waiters froze. He walked straight to their table. "Toren," Denna pulled her hand from under Elliot's. "What are you doing here?" Toren ignored the question. He looked at Elliot with palpable contempt. "You left this behind," Toren said, throwing Denna's phone charger on the table. The plastic object hit the porcelain plate with a loud crack. "I don't need that right now," Denna stammered, feeling her face burn. "You didn't answer," Toren said, his voice low and dangerous. "I called 3 times. I assumed your phone was dead." "Who is this?" Elliot asked, standing up. He tried to look imposing, but next to Toren, he looked like a schoolboy. "The security cousin?" Toren turned his head slowly toward Elliot. "Cousin," Toren let out a short, humorless laugh. "Is that what you told him?" He looked at Denna. There was hurt in his eyes, mixed with fury. "Toren, let's go outside." Denna stood up, trying to avoid a scene. But Elliot intervened, assuming a protective stance. "Denna, if this guy is bothering you—" Toren took a step forward, invading Elliot's space. "Bothering?" Toren growled. "I am the reason she sleeps safe at night. And you, scribe, you are just a confused man who doesn't know what he wants. Do not touch her again." "Toren, stop!" Denna grabbed his arm. The muscle under the jacket was hard as stone. "Let's leave, now." Toren looked at her hand on his arm. The contact seemed to calm him minimally. He took a deep breath, controlling the beast. "Let's go," he said to her. "Denna, you don't have to go with him," Elliot said, worried. Denna looked at Elliot, at the handsome, familiar face. Then she looked at Toren, unpredictable and totally devoted to her in a distorted way. "Sorry, Elliot, I have to go." She left the restaurant, pulling Toren. They walked in silence to the corner. When they turned the street, Denna let go of his arm and pushed him. "What was that?" "He was touching you." "So what? What's the problem?" Toren pinned her against a building wall. There was no violence, only desperation. He held her face with both hands, forcing her to look into his eyes.
I cannot bear to see another man touch what is mine, he said, his voice hoarse, letting the fury and desire he had been hiding escape. Denna stopped breathing. The world around her, the traffic noise, the people passing by, everything disappeared. Torin opened his eyes. The determination in them wavered. He lowered his head slowly toward her face. His lips brushed hers, a light, hesitant touch. Torin's phone rang in his pocket, interrupting them, a loud, shrill sound. He pulled away, swearing in a language Denna didn't know. He pulled the device out. "What?" he answered, furious. His expression changed. It became serious, cold. "Understood." Torin hung up and put the phone in his jacket pocket. His expression was indecipherable, a stone mask covering any trace of the vulnerability he had shown seconds before while nearly kissing her. "What was it? Who was it?" Denna asked, her voice still trembling from the interrupted proximity. "I found a lead," he said, his voice devoid of emotion, "on how to get back home." Torin didn't look at her. He started walking toward the main avenue, signaling for a taxi with an authority that made the driver stop immediately. They got into the car. The destination Torin gave the driver was an address in Brooklyn, an area of old industrial warehouses and dusty antique shops. During the trip, the silence in the back seat was heavy. Denna looked at Torin's hands, resting on his knees, hands that could break bones, but had held her with reverence. The taxi stopped in front of a narrow shop with a window full of stopped clocks and yellowed maps. "Wait here," Torin ordered, opening the door. "No way." Dennis stepped out right behind him. "If this guy is going to meet a warlock or a mobster, I'm coming along. The rent for your apartment is in my name." Torin huffed, but he didn't stop her. Inside the shop stood a thin young man with bottle-bottom glasses, wearing a t-shirt that said "Lone Wolf." When he heard the door, he spun his chair. Upon seeing Torin, the pen he was spinning between his fingers fell to the floor. "By the ancient gods," the young man whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. He adjusted his glasses, analyzing Torin from head to toe. "The bone structure, the aura of command. You really are an alpha, in 4K, live." Denna watched the scene stunned as the pieces fit together in her mind. When Torin demanded unrestricted access to the World Knowledge Network and spent hours on that phone, he wasn't watching cute cat videos. He scoured forums, conspiracy theory communities, and mythology subreddits until he found the only person who took the existence of kings from other worlds seriously. Torin was a strategist who found the local sage, even if the sage was a 20-year-old nerd living in a basement. "You are the guardian of knowledge I found in the digital archives," Torin said, with the seriousness of someone speaking to an ancient druid. "Gio, correct?" "Gio, Giovanni. You can call me the Observer if you prefer." Gio was almost hyperventilating with excitement. He walked around Torin, keeping a respectful distance, as if Torin were a priceless museum piece. "I demand to know how to return," Torin interrupted, his deep voice making the posters on the wall shake.
Gio stopped walking and smiled. "The portal isn't a wooden door you open with a kick. The universe doesn't make mistakes. It fills gaps. My theory is this. You were brought by a bond of desire, a desperate heart." Denna felt her blood run cold. "The desire," she whispered. "An unforgettable love," Torin repeated her words, looking at Gio. "That was the wish, the phrase I heard before being pulled into this world." "Exactly. It's a blood and soul pact, even if you didn't sign anything." Gio smiled enigmatically. "Until the summoner finds her unforgettable love, you are anchored to her. You are the instrument of destiny. Fulfill the wish, and the water will take you back. Fail, and you'll be trapped in this plane like a shadow, losing your memories and your power until you disappear." Torin stood motionless. He looked at Denna. The intensity in his eyes changed from fury to a cold, calculating resolution. "Then it's simple," Torin declared. "I need to ensure she has her happily ever after." "Exactly." Gio grabbed a notebook and began typing frantically, murmuring, "Classic plot twist. You need to complete the narrative arc." "And how do you intend to do that?" Denna asked, feeling a knot in her throat. Torin pointed to the door, toward Manhattan, where Elliot worked. "The scribe. You've loved him for years. If you win his heart, the wish will be fulfilled. I return to my kingdom, and you stay with your Prince Charming."
Denna felt as if she had been slapped. You want to set me up with Elliot? I need to return to my kingdom, Denna. My place is not here. His voice had no emotion, but his jaw was locked so tightly that a muscle jumped in his cheek. Apartment 4B had been transformed into a war strategy room, but instead of invasion maps, there were fashion magazines, etiquette manuals, and a whiteboard where Toren had drawn a complex tactical plan. The target is Elliot, Toren said, tapping the whiteboard with a metal ruler. Weaknesses: inflated ego, professional insecurity, absent fiancé. Strengths: none visible, but he has money. Denna was sitting on the sofa, hugging a cushion, watching the scene in disbelief. This is ridiculous, Toren. You can't plan a romance as if it were a military siege. Love is a battlefield, he retorted seriously, and you are losing, but that ends today. He walked over to her and pulled the cushion from her arms. Stand up, we're going to train posture. I know how to walk. You crawl. A man like the scribe needs someone who challenges him, not a doormat. During the next 3 hours, Toren was a tyrant. He made her walk around the room with books on her head. He criticized the way she laughed, how she sat, and how she maintained eye contact. Now, the flirting, Toren said, standing in front of her. Try to seduce me. Denna laughed nervously. What? No. Do it. Imagine I am Elliot. We are alone in the office. Say something that makes his heart race. Denna looked at Toren. It was impossible to imagine him being Elliot. Elliot was safe, predictable. Toren was chaos contained in a sculptural body. You know, Elliot, the reports are ready, she tried. Toren rolled his eyes. Pathetic. He'll be asleep before you finish the sentence. Try again. Use your eyes. Get closer. Invade his territory. Denna took a deep breath. Frustration and attraction were mixed in a dangerous cocktail. She wanted to prove she could do it. She took a step forward, entering Toren's personal space. She tilted her chin up, looking directly into his golden eyes. She raised her hand and, in a bold gesture, straightened his jacket collar. You know, Elliot, you're always so serious, so focused. You wear this cold, inattainable armor. It gives the impression that you're untouchable, distant, but your eyes betray you. Toren stood still, golden eyes fixed on her, his breath held. You look good in black, she tried, whispering and lowering her tone. But I think you'd look better without this jacket. Silence fell over the room as she held the zipper of his jacket. Toren's breath hitched. His pupils dilated instantly, swallowing the gold. His body radiated heat, a physical wave that hit Denna. He didn't pull back. On the contrary, he leaned in, his face millimeters from hers, his hand raised, hovering over her waist, wanting to touch, wanting to pull her close, but he retracted it suddenly, grabbing her wrist to stop her from continuing. Good, he said, his voice hoarse and raspy. Very good. If you do that with the scribe, he'll forget his own name. He pulled away, turning his back. Training is over. Tomorrow we apply the theory. The perfect opportunity arose 2 days later, in an ironically tragic way. Elliot arrived at the office with red eyes and the look of someone who hadn't slept. Sarah had asked for time. The engagement was on pause. Toren, who now monitored Denna's conversations via text, replied immediately. The flank is open. Attack now. Invite him to something that isn't work. Denna hesitated, but Toren's determination was contagious. Elliot, she said, entering his room, you look terrible. Elliot smiled sadly. Thanks for the honesty, Denna. You need to get out of here. Forget the deadlines. Let's go somewhere to de-stress. Drinking? No, something better.
An hour later, Denna took Elliot to a retro arcade downtown. It was noisy, colorful, and childish, exactly the opposite of Elliot's regulated life. But there was a problem. Toren was there. He was leaning against a pinball machine in the back, wearing a cap to hide his face. Denna! Elliot seemed genuinely excited to see the games. You're amazing. I haven't been to a place like this since college. They started playing. Elliot was terrible. He lost at everything. Car racing, target shooting, basketball. But he laughed. He laughed like Denna had never seen him laugh. And Denna, following Toren's advice, touched his arm when he made a joke, maintained eye contact, challenged him. Elliot was enchanted. "You're full of surprises, Denna," he said, while they tried to catch a stuffed bear in the claw machine. "I always saw you as the serious professional, but you're fun." "I keep my cards close to my chest," she replied, looking discreetly toward the back of the hall. Toren was playing the punching machine, the one that measures strength. He threw a casual punch at the leather bag. The machine beeped, lights flashed, and the digital scoreboard burned out, smoking. The owner ran over, shouting. Elliot didn't see. He was focused on Denna. "You know, Sarah would never come here. She'd say it's dirty and noisy." Elliot looked at Denna with a new intensity. He moved closer. The mood changed. Fun gave way to something more intimate. Elliot placed his hand on Denna's face, caressing her cheek. "Maybe I've been looking in the wrong place this whole time," he whispered, leaning in to kiss her. It was the moment, the unforgettable love, the wish coming true. Denna's heart raced, but it wasn't from emotion. It was from panic. She looked over Elliot's shoulder. Torin was standing 30 feet away. He was no longer hiding. He was watching, arms crossed, face expressionless. He was seeing his plan work. He was seeing her wish come true so he could leave. His passivity hurt Denna more than any shout. Elliot was inches from her lips. Denna placed her hand on Elliot's chest and gently pushed him away. "Elliot, wait," she said, her voice trembling. "What is it? Did I go too fast?" "No, it's just, you're still engaged, technically, and I don't want to be the rebound." Elliot blanked, processing the gentle rejection. He backed away, embarrassed. "You're right. Sorry. I got carried away." On the other side of the hall, Toren saw the kiss fail to happen. He frowned. The bond between them vibrated with Denna's confusion and deep sadness. Denna grabbed her bag. "I think we should leave, Elliot." She left the arcade without looking at Toren. She had stopped the kiss not just because of Elliot's fiancé, but because when Elliot approached, the only thing she could think was that his eyes weren't golden. That night, Denna went up to the building's roof. The cold wind dried the tears on her face. The roof access door opened. Heavy footsteps approached. "You failed," Toren said. He stood beside her, looking out at the illuminated city. "He was ready. You had him in the palm of your hand. Why did you back off?" "Because it felt wrong," Denna replied, hugging her own arms. "Wrong?" Toren turned to her, anger overflowing. "It was what you wanted, the happy ending. I trained you, I pushed you to him. Why don't you just accept it so I can get out of this hell?" "Because I don't love him," Denna shouted, turning to Toren. The silence that followed was absolute. Toren seemed to have been hit by an arrow. "What?" he whispered. "I thought I did. It was a fantasy, a distant idol, but when he got close, there was nothing." She took a step toward Toren. "It wasn't unforgettable." Toren looked at her, his chest rising and falling rapidly. "Then what is unforgettable to you, Denna?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. Denna looked at his scars, at the eyes that truly saw her, at the man who had fought against his own nature to make her happy, even if it meant seeing her with another. "Someone who would burn the world for me," she said. "Someone who invades my apartment and eats my food." Toren let out a guttural sound, as if his resistance had finally broken. "You are a fool," he growled, pulling her to him violently. "You can't choose the villain. You know how villains' stories end. They disappear, they are pushed out of the narrative, they cease to exist so the story's main couple can be together." "Then we change the ending," Denna replied, grabbing his jacket. Toren didn't wait any longer. He kissed her.
It wasn't a movie kiss, soft and romantic. It was a hungry, desperate, possessive kiss. He took her mouth as if it were oxygen and he were drowning. His hands were in her hair, on her waist, pulling her close to merge them into one. The world around them disappeared. There was no cold, no roof, no Elliot. There was only Toren's heat and the absolute certainty, vibrating in every cell of Denna's body, that this was the wish. This was the unforgettable love. And the moment she admitted it in her heart, the sky above them thundered. Suddenly, Toren pulled back, letting out a muffled grunt. He placed his hand on his chest, over his heart, where he kept the coin in the inner pocket of his jacket. A golden, pulsating glow leaked through the thick leather fabric, illuminating his face with a supernatural and feverish light. "Toren?" Denna tried to touch him, but he pushed her away in a desperate gesture of protection. "Stay back," he ordered, his voice failing, teeth gritted.
He pulled the coin from his pocket. The metal glowed like a live coal. The air around them on the roof began to vibrate, a low, distorted sound, as if reality were being torn apart. "What's happening?" Denna shouted over the growing buzz. Torin looked at the coin, then at Denna. Understanding crossed his face. "The wish," he said, looking into her eyes. "Yes, I said it was you." "Exactly," he laughed, a dry and bitter sound. "And that's the problem, Denna. The contract is fulfilled." Denna felt the floor vanish beneath her feet. It means the water is calling me back." His body began to flicker, like a TV image with bad reception. For a second, his hand became translucent. Denna lunged forward, grabbing his hand. Her fingers passed through his skin for an instant, feeling only a cold vacuum, before solidifying again. "I don't want you to go. If the wish is mine, I can change it. I wish for you to stay." Toren held her wrists. The contact was weak, unstable. "Magic doesn't work that way. I am an intruder in this world. I cannot fight what I am, Denna." He touched her face, his hand trembling. "And I am just a story that has reached the last page. You belong to this world. Live your life. Find someone real to love." The coin's glow intensified, momentarily blinding them. Toren fell to his knees, gasping as if being pulled by invisible chains. "Toren!" Denna knelt with him, hugging his broad shoulders. He looked at her. Physical pain was evident, but the pain in his eyes was worse. With one last effort of will, Toren closed his fist over the incandescent coin. The glow exploded. Denna closed her eyes, shielding her face. When silence and darkness returned to the roof, she was alone. Denna spent the night in apartment 4B, sitting on the floor where Toren used to sleep. His apartment was silent. His clothes were still there. His scent still impregnated the air. When the sun rose, Denna felt a cold numbness. She stood up mechanically. She needed answers. She needed to go to Gio's antique shop. She left the building, ignoring the doorman who greeted her. She walked to the subway like a zombie. But when she reached the street of the warehouse in Brooklyn, the shop didn't exist. There was only a graffiti-covered brick wall and a rusted steel door with a "for sale" sign. Denna punched the steel door until her knuckles bled. "Bring him back," she screamed at the deserted street. "You lying nerd, bring him back." No one answered, only the distant sound of a passing train. Defeated, Denna returned to Manhattan, to the office. She didn't know where else to go. The office was calm. It was Saturday, but Elliot usually worked on weekends. Denna entered, swiping her badge. The office was empty, except for the light on in Elliot's room. She walked into his room without knocking.
Elliot was sitting at his desk, head in his hands. He looked up, surprised.
"Denna, what are you doing here? You look terrible." Denna ignored the comment. She walked to the visitor's chair and sat down, staring at nothing. "He's gone." Elliot frowned.
"Who, your cousin? This security guy?" "The love of my life," Denna corrected, her voice emotionless. "The man I invented." Elliot stood up and came around the desk. He sat on the edge, near her. "Denna, you're talking nonsense. You need to rest. That guy seemed dangerous. Maybe it's better this way." "Better?" Denna laughed, a broken sound. "You don't understand. He was the only real thing in my life. All this," she gestured to the office, to Elliot's books on the shelves, "this is the fantasy. He was the truth." Elliot sighed. He seemed genuinely concerned. "You know, Denna, Sarah broke up with me for good yesterday. She said I live in a fictional world, that I'm never present." He looked at Denna. "Maybe we're both the same. In love with the idea of love, but unable to deal with the reality of it." Denna looked at Elliot. For the first time, she didn't see the unattainable idol. She saw only a sad, ordinary man. "No, Elliot," she said softly, standing up. "I dealt with reality. I touched it, and it had scars and a horrible temper." Suddenly, an idea flashed through her mind. She ran out of the room, leaving Elliot alone with his literary awards. Denna needed her laptop. If Toren was a story, then she was the author, and authors have power over their worlds. Denna burst into her apartment like a hurricane. She opened the laptop on the kitchen table. The Tyrant Neighbor file was open.
She began to type. She didn't continue from where she left off. She deleted the last chapter. She deleted the scene where the villain leaves. Her fingers pounded the keys with fury. Toren did not leave. The portal failed. The bond was stronger than magic. He was tied to the earth not by the coin, but by her will. She wrote with desperate faith, believing that the words on the screen could bend reality. He appeared at the door. Now, he was there. Denna stopped. She looked at the apartment door. Nothing. Silence. Tears of frustration fell onto the keyboard. Denna stared at the blank laptop screen. Her fingers ached from typing, deleting, and rewriting. Toren came back. The door opened. She hit enter. The words trembled on the screen and disappeared, as if fresh ink had been washed away. "Work, damn it," she shouted, hitting the table. "I created you. I order you to come back." She tried again. The portal failed. He stayed in New York. This time, the cursor froze. The laptop fan raced, a high-pitched hum that filled the silence of the apartment. The screen flickered once, twice. The white of the text program page was replaced by a dense, static black background. Denna tried to close the program. Nothing. She tried to turn off the computer using the physical button. The device remained on, glowing with an intensity that hurt her eyes. Lines of code began to run across the screen at a dizzying speed. It wasn't ordinary programming language. They were runes and symbols Denna vaguely recognized. Then the scrolling stopped. A single phrase appeared in the center of the screen, pulsing in a deep red tone. Critical error. Character cannot be maintained on this server. Solution: migration of author data. What? Denna pushed her chair back, her heart beating in her throat.
A new line appeared. Do you wish to save changes? 2 options blinked beneath the question, yes or no. Denna didn't touch anything, but the cursor moved on its own, slow, deliberate, dragging across the black screen until it clicked on yes.
The sound in the apartment ceased. The hum of the refrigerator, the traffic outside, Denna's own breathing, everything stopped. The laptop screen exploded in light. An icy gale blew from the monitor, throwing papers and books away. Denna tried to stand up, but gravity seemed to have flipped 90 degrees. She was pulled forward. Her fingers tried to grab the table, but the wood slipped away. The monitor looked like an infinite tunnel, a vortex of snow and darkness. The force ripped her from the chair. The apartment in New York folded in on itself and vanished. Denna was swallowed by the screen. The floor beneath her hands was no longer the apartment's wooden floor. Denna opened her eyes. The thin air burned her lungs. She was kneeling in the center of a colossal hall. Black stone walls rose until they were lost in the darkness of the ceiling, supported by pillars thick as sequoias. Torches burned on the columns, casting long, dancing shadows.
Around her, men and women dressed in thick furs and leather armor stared at her. Swords were drawn. The sound of metal scraping on metal echoed as the guards pointed spears at her. "Sorcery!" someone shouted. Denna raised her hands, trembling violently. I'm not a witch." "Silence," a voice thundered from the back of the hall. The crowd of warriors opened a path, parting like the sea. At the end of the stone corridor sat a throne made of black iron, and in it, wearing a crown of raw iron, sat Toren. But it wasn't the Toren in gray sweatpants who ate toast in her kitchen. This Toren was terrifying. He wore a heavy black wolf fur cloak over his shoulders. Leather armor covered his chest, marked by claws. His hair was loose, wild. The scar on his face seemed deeper in the torchlight. He held a broadsword, the tip resting on the stone floor. His golden eyes met hers. The silence in the hall became absolute. No one dared breathe. Toren stood up slowly. The movement was fluid, lethal. He descended the steps of the throne's dais. The sound of his heavy boots on the stone floor was the only noise in the world. The guards backed away, lowering their spears, terrified by the king's expression. He stopped in front of Denna. He looked larger here, more real. Denna looked up, her teeth chattering from the cold and fear. Surprise? The computer. There was an error. I tried to change the ending and... Toren didn't wait for her to finish. He dropped the sword on the floor with a deafening clang. He fell to his knees in front of her, ignoring royalty, ignoring the court that watched in shock. He grabbed her shoulders. His hands were hot, burning against the cold of the hall. "You came," he said, his eyes sweeping her face as if needing to confirm she wasn't a hallucination.
I didn't have a choice, Denna sobbed, shock finally giving way to tears. I tried to write you back, but the story brought me. Toren let out a laugh, a hoarse, triumphant sound. He pulled Denna to him, burying his face in her neck. The embrace was crushing. He squeezed her as if wanting to merge her into his own armor. They told me I was mad, he murmured against her skin, that the other world was a dream, that the woman with brown eyes was a feverish delusion. He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. But here you are, in my great hall. He stood up, pulling her with him. Denna stumbled, her legs numb, but he held her firm against his body. He unfastened the wolf fur cloak from his shoulders and wrapped it around her, covering her completely and marking her with the scent and colors of the royal house. Toren turned to the court, to the generals and advisors who stared open-mouthed. He placed his hand on Denna's shoulder, forcing her to keep her head high beside him. This is Denna, the author of fate. He paused, pulling her closer against him. And she is not a witch. She is my queen, my mate. A murmur of shock rippled through the hall. Toren smiled, that arrogant, dangerous, and devastatingly handsome smile she had spent months describing on her laptop. He tilted his head and kissed her. The reality of New York with its gray offices and lukewarm loves no longer existed. Denna gripped Toren's armor and returned the kiss. The northern cold howled outside, but inside the fur cloak, in the arms of the villain she loved, it had never been so warm. In her apartment, the cursor on the screen began to move. A loading bar briefly appeared on the laptop screen and reached 100%. An email titled "The Tyrant Neighbor, Final Version" was automatically sent to the publisher. The email window closed, the word processor opened a new blank page, and then, slowly, letters began to appear. The Queen of the North, Book 2. The cursor kept blinking, waiting, hungry for the next events that were yet to arise on the paper. Finally, with a soft and definitive click, the laptop turned itself off, plunging the apartment into darkness.
And that brings us to the end. Thank you for spending this time with me. To catch the next one, be sure to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. I'm always curious to see how far these stories travel, so please comment below with your city and country. Thank you endlessly for your kindness and support. Until next time, take care.